everyone. My name's Mary, and I'm the Director of Youth Services at the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. You probably recognize the elephant behind me, and maybe you even recognize some of the pictures from our library website. Well, I'm here today to start reading our next story, and it's called Humphrey's Playful Puppy Problem. This book was written by Betty G. Birney and illustrated by Priscilla Burris. The book was published by G.P. Putnam's Sons, an imprint of Penguin Group, in 2014. Chapter 1, Pet Project. It was a Friday afternoon at Longfellow School. I'm the classroom hamster in room 26. I was nibbling on a yummy carrot stick when I heard Mrs. Brisbane say, "Class, don't forget to bring in your science projects on Monday." That was such exciting news, I almost dropped my carrot. My classmates had been talking about their experiments all week. They sounded very interesting. I turned to Og, the other classroom pet. "Did you hear that, Og?" I said. "We're going to see all of the science projects on Monday." "Boing, boing," Og replied. He makes a funny sound, but he can't help it. He's a frog. "Would any of you like to tell us about your project now?" Mrs. Brisbane asked. "I would!" "Raise your hand," Heidi called out. "Heidi, what did you forget to do?" Mrs. Brisbane said. Heidi raised her hand. "Sorry," she said. "I'm testing different liquids to see how long it takes for them to freeze." "Interesting," Mrs. Brisbane said. "What have you tried?" "Plain water, sugar water, and salt water," Heidi said. AJ's hand shut up. "I don't get it," he said in his loud voice. "Won't they be melted by the time you get to school?" "Lower your voice, AJ," Mrs. Brisbane reminded him. "All right," he said in a softer voice. "But won't they melt?" "Yes," Heidi said. "So I'm taking pictures and keeping a chart. That's what I'll bring in." Just thinking about things that are cold, cold, cold made me shiver, even though I have a fur coat. "How about you, Saya?" Mrs. Brisbane asked next. Speak Up Saya didn't raise her hand because she doesn't like to talk in class. Saya smiled shyly. "I'm growing beans on my windowsill," she said. "Some will have full sun and some will be covered." "Stop giggling, Gail was growing mold in her refrigerator." Mold sounded yucky, but Gail said it was fun. Pay Attention Art talked about magnets, and Golden Miranda said something about making a rainbow. Then I noticed Richie Rinaldi waving his hand. Mrs. Brisbane asked him to speak. He said something like, "Smmm." At least, that's what I heard. And hamsters have very good hearing. "Repeat it, please, Richie," Mrs. Brisbane said, "and this time, say it so I can understand it." "It's my turn to take Humphrey home this weekend, right?" Richie asked. I need him for my experiment. I was happy to hear that classroom pets like me love to be needed. I thought your project was about ants, Mrs. Brisbane said. It was, Richie replied, but my mom didn't like having ants in the house. Now I have a better idea using a hamster. Mrs. Brisbane checked her list. Yes, Richie, she said. It's your turn to take Humphrey home. Do you want to tell us about your new experiment? Yes, tell us, I shouted. Of course, all my friends heard was squeak, squeak, squeak. Richie thought for a moment. I think it should be a surprise. Kirk Chen raised his hand. I know what it is, he said. Richie's going to turn Humphrey into a monster. Then he raised his arms straight out in front of him and made a scary face. And when he's a monster, he can have a ghoul friend, Kirk added. Everybody laughed. It was funny, unless you were the hamster who was going to be turned into a monster. And I really didn't want a ghoul friend. Boing, 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 boing. Og sounded worried. After all, his tank sits next to my cage on the table by the window. He probably didn't want to have a monster for a neighbor. But Richie had a big smile on his face. I was happy for him. I would have been even happier if I'd known what the experiment was going to be. When we were on the school bus that afternoon, Richie told me, I have a surprise for you at home. The bus was bumpy and thumpy. I slid from one side of my cage to the other. Just you wait, Richie said. It's a giant surprise. A giant is something like a monster. Did Richie already have a giant at home? Eek! I squeaked. Richie just laughed. You'll find out soon enough, he said. The surprise had a name. Poppy. Poppy was a puppy. She was small, with curly black fur, and she loved to bark. All that barking made my ears twitch, my whiskers wiggle. Isn't she great, Humphrey? Richie asked. He set my cage on the desk in his room. I've wanted a dog for years, and finally my parents let me have one. I didn't really think Puppy was great. I don't think any dog is great. Dogs have large pointed teeth and wet noses. They have big tails and sharp claws, and they aren't usually friendly to small creatures like me. Woof! Puppy barked. She tried to jump up and see me. Luckily, she was too short to get all the way up to my cage. She likes you, Humphrey, Richie laughed. She wants to be your friend. Woof! Puppy barked. She even wagged her tail. But I still didn't think she wanted to be my friend. Wait until Uncle Aldo comes over tomorrow, Richie said. He's going to help me with my experiment. Richie's Uncle Aldo is also our school's custodian. At night, when he comes into room 26 to clean, he talks to Og and me. Sometimes he balances a broom on one finger and gives us treats. I was glad I would be seeing Aldo the next day. I wasn't glad about the experiment, though. After dinner, it was time to watch a movie. Richie put my cage on a shelf in the living room. Poppy couldn't jump that high, but that didn't stop her from trying. She looked up at me and barked and barked and barked some more. Woof, 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 woof. Richie's mom finally put the puppy in the kitchen so we could start the movie. It was about a mad scientist named Frankenstein who created a scary monster. He hooked him up to a scary machine. There was lightning, and the monster came to life. He had a flat head and bolts sticking out of his neck. The sight of him made my fur stand up on end. Richie came over to my cage. He made weird faces at me and said, "Humphrey Stein," in a creepy voice. Then he laughed. He didn't sound like Richie at all. By the time Richie brought me into his room and went to bed, it was raining outside. Would there be lightning? Would I end up with bolts in my neck like Mr. Frankenstein's monster? Would people call me Humphrey Stein? I crawled into my little sleeping house, but I didn't sleep a wink. I love, love, love being a hamster, but I would not love to be a monster. Chapter 2. I go for a spin. During the week, I get to see Aldo every night. I hardly ever get to see him outside of school. So I was happy when he came into Richie's room on Saturday afternoon. "Greetings, my fine furry friend," Aldo said. "Glad to see you, Aldo," I squeaked back. He laughed. "I think you're glad to see me, too." I love to make Aldo laugh. When he does, his big, furry mustache shakes so hard. I sometimes think it's going to fall off. "I hear Richie has planned an experiment with you," Aldo said. I wouldn't mind if Richie did an experiment with me. I just wouldn't want him to do an experiment on me. "Thanks for helping me, Uncle Aldo," Richie said. Just then, Poppy came racing into Richie's room. She ran in a circle around Aldo's feet. "Poppy, no," Aldo said in a firm voice. "Sit." Poppy did not sit. Instead, she jumped up and put her front paws on Aldo's legs. Then Poppy noticed me. She raced up to the desk and looked straight at me. "Woof, woof," she barked. "Go away," I squeaked. My squeaking only made Poppy bark more. "Look," Richie said, "Poppy wants to play with Humphrey." The thought of Poppy playing with me made me shiver and quiver. Poppy kept on barking. "Woof, woof, woof." Her voice was so loud, it made my tiny hamster ears hurt. "Time for you to go," Aldo said. He picked up the little dog and carried her out of the room. Then he came back in without Poppy and closed the door. "Now, we can get to work," he said. Thanks, Aldo," I squeaked. Aldo said, "I think Humphrey is glad that Poppy's outside." Aldo is a very smart human. Richie and Aldo pulled chairs up to the desk and looked into my cage. Hi, I squeaked. "So, what you want to do?" Aldo asked Richie. I scrambled to the front of my cage so I could hear Richie's plan. "I want to see how many times Humphrey can spin his wheel in 3 minutes," Richie said. I love spinning on my wheel, so that sounded great, great, great to me. That's a good idea, Aldo said. How are you going to do that? Richie shrugged. I'm not sure. He spins pretty fast, don't you, Humphrey? I scampered over to my wheel and began to spin. Hey, Humphrey must have understood you, Aldo said. But that's impossible, Richie replied. He's a hamster. Aldo laughed. You never know with Humphrey. They both leaned in closer as I began to spin faster and faster. I see the problem, Aldo said. He spins so fast, it's hard to count how many times the wheel goes around. Yes, Richie agreed. Should I tell him to slow down? Aldo shook his head. No. Then it wouldn't be a real experiment. I kept on spinning while Richie and Aldo thought about the problem. Then I heard a distant woof, woof. Poppy was scratching at the door and barking. Go away, Poppy, Richie yelled. I don't think Poppy could hear him over all that barking. She made me so jumpy, I spun the wheel faster and faster. Look at Humphrey go, Richie said. I wish Poppy would go, I squeaked. I wish she'd go far, far away. Aldo and Richie watched me spin on the wheel. You need a way to mark each time the wheel goes around once, Aldo said. I kept spinning, and they kept thinking. I was hoping they had an idea soon, because, to squeak the truth, I was getting tired. I know, Aldo said. We need something that makes a sound. I was glad that Aldo had an idea. I let my wheel slow down a bit while I tried to think of something that makes a sound. I looked over at the side of the cage where my water bottle and food dish are. Sometimes my water bottle makes a glug, glug, glug sound. It's not very loud. I looked over at my poo corner. No sound there. I looked down at my soft bedding. It was nice and quiet. Then I looked up and saw a tiny little bell. Not long ago, my friends gave it to me for a surprise. I stopped spinning and hopped off my wheel. Then I scampered up to the top of my cage and rang the little bell with my paw. Ding, ding, ding. Aldo and Richie were so busy thinking they didn't hear it. I tried again. Ding, ding, ding. This time Aldo looked up. What's that sound? He asked. Richie looked up too. Oh, that's Humphrey's new bell, he said. Aldo leaned in close to my cage. A bell? That's just what we need. Thanks, Humphrey. You're welcome, I told him. Aldo probably didn't understand my squeaks, but I was happy he liked my idea. Richie and Aldo got to work. First, Richie took my wheel out of the cage and put it on the desk. Don't worry, Humphrey, he said. You'll get it back. Aldo made a stand out of a coat hanger. He hung the bell on the coat hanger with a piece of string and set it near the wheel. We need something that will ring the bell each time the wheel spins, Aldo said. It might be strong enough to ring the bell, but small enough to fit under the wheel. This time Richie came up with a good idea. Soon they had attached a bent paper clip to the side of my wheel. Humphrey, we need your help again, Richie said. That was good news, because classroom hamsters love to help. Richie reached into my cage and gently placed me on my wheel again. You know what to do, Humphrey, he said. Yes, I did. I began to spin my wheel, faster and faster. Ding, 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 ding. Just then, Richie put his hand on my wheel. I stopped so suddenly I tumbled over. "Sorry, Humphrey," he said, as he gently placed me back in my cage. Richie told me, "I need to finish the rest of the experiment." The rest of the experiment? What was coming next? Would I end up like the monster in the Frankenstein movie? Just then I heard something whining and scratching at the door. Poppy was back. "Woof, woof," she barked. I shivered a little. I didn't want to turn into a monster, and I really, really, really didn't want to play with Poppy. And that's where we'll end our story today. We'll continue tomorrow and find out what happens with the experiment. This is Humphrey's Playful Puppy Problem, written by Betty G. Birney, illustrated by Priscilla Burris. The book was published by G.P. Putnam's Sons, an imprint of Penguin Group, in 2014. So tomorrow we'll find out just what happens with that experiment and what else Richie has in store for Humphrey. So until next time, I'm Mary from the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm so glad you joined us today. So until next time, bye-bye.